Mara Sullivan's hands were still shaking when she opened the door and saw the blood. Not a little. Enough to paint the snow black under the porch light. The Navy SEAL collapsed forward, his weight hitting her injured shoulder like a sledgehammer, and behind him stood a dog so thin his ribs looked like piano keys. Then the animal did something that stopped her heart. He rose on his hind legs, pressed his paws together, and begged. Not for food, for his handler's life. Before we begin, tell us what city you're watching from in the comments below. If you believe in second chances and divine appointments, please like this video and subscribe to our channel. Now, let's discover how one knock in a snowstorm changed 3 broken lives forever. The cabin door shouldn't have opened. That was Mara Sullivan's first coherent thought as freezing air slammed into her face and the stranger's body weight drove her backward into the small entry hall. Her second thought was simpler and more primitive. Blood. "Help me," the man gasped, and then his knees gave out. Mara caught him under the arms, her injured shoulder screaming in protest, nerve damage from 6 months ago lighting up like a firework. She'd been on medical leave from the FBI ever since that night in Denver when everything went wrong. The night her undercover operation collapsed. The night she'd failed to save those kids. "I've got you," she said, though she wasn't sure she did. The man was easily 200 pounds of muscle and soaked winter gear. "Stay with me." His eyes rolled back. "Valor," he whispered. "Don't let them take Valor." That's when Mara saw the dog. The Belgian Malinois stood just outside the threshold, snow collecting on his tan and black coat. His amber eyes were locked on his handler with an intensity that looked like pain given physical form. The animal was emaciated, hip bones jutting, ribs visible even through his thick winter fur, but his posture was perfect. Military. Trained. "Come," Mara said firmly. "Inside. Now." The dog didn't move. The man's hand shot out, grabbing Mara's wrist with surprising strength. "He won't leave me. Never leaves me." His voice cracked. "Been together 3 years. They said he died. They lied." Mara understood immediately. She'd worked enough cases. "You're both coming in. That's an order, soldier." Something in her tone must have registered, because the Malinois took one careful step forward, then another. His right front leg hitched, an old injury, probably never treated properly. When he crossed the threshold, he moved directly to his handler's side and lay down, body pressed against the man's leg. Mara kicked the door shut and assessed. The stranger wore what was left of a Navy uniform under a civilian jacket that had seen better months. Dark hair plastered to his skull, stubble that was closer to a beard, lips edged with blue. His hands were wrapped in makeshift bandages that were soaked through. "What's your name?" Mara dragged him toward the fireplace her father had built 30 years ago. The cast-iron stove was still warm. She'd been feeding it all evening, trying to keep the ghosts at bay. "Brennan," he managed. "Dominic Brennan. Dom." "Navy SEAL?" "Was." He coughed, and something wet rattled in his chest. "Still am. Doesn't leave you." Mara knew that feeling. The FBI didn't leave you either, even when you walked away, especially when you walked away because your body broke before your will did. She stripped off his outer layers with practiced efficiency. Underneath, his thermal shirt was stiff with frozen sweat and blood. A pressure bandage circled his ribs, another on his left thigh. Both were expertly applied. He'd done it himself. "Who did this to you?" Mara asked. "Doesn't matter." Dom's teeth chattered. "They're still out there. They'll come back." "For you?" "For him." Dom's eyes found the dog. "Valor's worth more than me. I'm just Collateral damage. Valor's ears swiveled at the sound of his name. The dog stood, wobbled for a second, then moved closer. Not to his handler this time. To Mara. He pressed his shoulder against her leg, and the contact was so gentle, so deliberate, that Mara felt something crack inside her chest. "What's he doing?" she whispered. "Grounding you." Dom's voice was fading. "You were shaking, breathing fast. He's trained for it. PTSD response protocol." Mara looked down. Her hands were trembling. She hadn't even noticed. The dog was breathing slowly, exaggeratedly, his ribcage expanding and contracting in a rhythm that seemed designed to be followed. Without thinking, Mara matched it. In, out. In, out. Her heart rate slowed. "Good boy," she breathed. Valor's tail moved once, not a wag, an acknowledgement. Dom's eyes were closing. Don't let them find him, please. He's already died once on paper. If they take him again..." "No one's taking anyone." Mara's voice came out harder than she intended. She grabbed her phone. No signal. The storm had killed the cell tower 20 miles out. She'd been cut off since this morning. "Stay awake, Dom. You hear me? Stay awake." But he was already gone, slipping into unconsciousness with the resigned look of a man who'd done this before. Mara moved fast. Her father had been a paranoid survivalist in the best way, and his emergency cabinet still held everything from first aid supplies to an old satellite SOS beacon. She powered it on with shaking fingers and sent the distress ping. The response came 90 seconds later. "Message received. Plows clearing Route 19. Units delayed. Remain sheltered." Delayed. That meant hours in a blizzard like this. Mara built up the fire and stripped Dom down to dry layers, wrapping him in every blanket she could find. His skin was gray. His pulse was thin. He needed a hospital, not a cabin in the woods with a former FBI agent who couldn't even handle the sound of a car backfiring without hitting the ground. Valor watched everything with those unsettling amber eyes. When Mara turned to him, offering water in a metal bowl, the dog sniffed once and turned away. "You need to drink," Mara said. "When's the last time you had water?" Valor didn't answer, obviously, but he also didn't drink. "Stubborn." Mara sat back on her heels. "Just like him, huh?" The dog's gaze flicked to Dom, then back to Mara, assessing, calculating, deciding whether she was trustworthy. "Listen," Mara said quietly. "I don't know what you two have been through, but I know what it's like when the world tries to break you. I know what it's like to keep moving, because stopping means dying." She swallowed. "He needs you strong, so drink the damn water." Valor's ears twitched. Then, slowly, he lowered his head and drank. "Good," Mara whispered. "Good boy." She checked Dom's pulse again. Still there. Still fighting. She ran her hands over his gear, looking for ID, for anything that would explain how a Navy SEAL and a military dog ended up bleeding out on her porch in the middle of Montana. In his jacket pocket, she found a folded piece of paper. Water damaged, edges torn, but the writing was still visible. Coordinates. A list of names, half of them crossed out, and at the bottom, in block letters, "They're selling us." Mara's blood went cold. A sudden bang echoed from somewhere outside, metal on metal, sharp and violent. Valor's head snapped up, ears forward. A low growl vibrated in his chest. And Mara's world tilted. Her vision tunneled. The cabin walls seemed to press in. She couldn't breathe, couldn't move. Her shoulder throbbed where the bullet had torn through 6 months ago, phantom pain so real she could feel the heat of it. Not now. Not now. Not now. But her body didn't listen. It never did. Panic had its own language, and her nervous system spoke it fluently. Then Valor moved. He was there, pressing into her side, his weight solid and warm. He didn't bark, didn't paw at her. He just breathed, slow, steady, a metronome made of fur and discipline. Mara's hands found his shoulders. She gripped hard, probably too hard, but Valor didn't flinch. He stayed. "Okay," she gasped. "Okay, I'm here. I'm here." The world came back. The cabin walls retreated. The fire crackled. Dom's breathing filled the silence. Mara looked down at Valor. "Did he train you? Or did you figure that out on your own?" Valor blinked slowly. "Doesn't matter," Mara whispered. "Thank you." She stood on shaking legs and crossed to the window. Outside, the storm was a white wall. Visibility was maybe 10 feet. But something had made that sound. Something close. Mara's mind went tactical. Old habits, good habits. She checked the door locks, checked the windows. Her father's hunting rifle was still mounted above the fireplace, and she pulled it down, hands moving on muscle memory. Checked the chamber. Loaded. Always loaded because her father had believed in being ready. "I hope you were right, Dad," she muttered. She grabbed her keys and moved to the door, pulling on her coat. Valor stood immediately, positioning himself between her and the unconscious Dom. "I'll be right back," Mara told him. 30 seconds, I promise." She opened the door just enough to slip through and ran to her SUV. It was FBI issued, which meant it had a few modifications civilian vehicles didn't, including emergency lights. Mara started the engine, pulled the vehicle closer to the cabin, and flipped the hidden switch under the dash. Red and blue lights exploded across the snowdrifts, painting the night in law enforcement colors. For a moment, everything was silent. Then, at the edge of the tree line, Mara saw it. A figure, tall, broad-shouldered, dressed in winter camouflage that would have been invisible without the strobing light. The figure froze, head turning toward the cabin, toward the lights, toward the message they sent. This house is not unprotected. This house is watched. The figure took one step back, then another, and then it was gone, swallowed by the storm and the pines. Mara's pulse hammered. She stood in the cold, snow stinging her face, until her fingers went numb. Then she sprinted back inside and locked the door behind her. Valor met her with those amber eyes, watching, waiting. "They were out there," Mara said. "Whoever hurt him, they followed you here." Valor's tail lowered. Not fear, acknowledgement. Mara crossed to Dom and checked his pulse again. Steady. His color was better. The warmth was bringing him back. "Who are you running from?" she asked the unconscious man. "What did you find?" The paper with the coordinates sat on the table. Mara picked it up, studying the names. Some she recognized. Military bases, known conflict zones. Others were unfamiliar. But the pattern was clear. These weren't random locations. They were waypoints. A route. And at the end of the route, Blue Haven Lake. Apex Canine Solutions. Mara's training kicked in. She grabbed her laptop, praying the satellite internet would hold. It took 3 tries, but the connection caught. Apex Canine Solutions. The website was sleek, professional. providing elite working dogs to military, law enforcement, and private security worldwide. Testimonials from satisfied clients, photos of beautiful German shepherds and Malinois in tactical gear. Nothing looked wrong. Everything looked wrong. Mara dug deeper. Corporate filings, tax records. The company had been founded 8 years ago by Marcus Devlin, former military contractor. No criminal record, clean history. Too clean. She cross-referenced the names on Dom's list. 3 of them were registered handlers for Apex. 2 were listed as deceased. Mara sat back, her mind racing. What are you into, Dominic Brennan? A soft sound made her turn. Dom's eyes were open, just barely. He was looking at her with the kind of exhaustion that came from fighting too long. You found it, he rasped. Apex. What is it? A pipeline, Dom coughed. They steal us, military dogs, fake our deaths, sell us to the highest bidder. Cartels, militias, foreign governments. His hand moved toward Valor. We're worth 6 figures, more if we're trained in explosives or combat. Mara's stomach turned. How many? At least 20 in the last 3 years, probably more. Dom's eyes closed. I've been tracking them for 11 months, since they took Valor, since they told me he died in a training accident. His voice broke. I believed them. For 2 weeks, I believed them. Then I saw the paperwork, the fake death certificate, the same signature on 5 other files. Why didn't you go to your command, to NCIS? Dom's laugh was bitter. I did. They told me I was experiencing grief-related paranoia, put me on psych leave. When I pushed, I got reassigned to a desk. He looked at her then. Really looked at her. You know what that's like. When the system won't listen. When they tell you you're crazy for seeing what's right in front of your face. Mara knew. God, she knew. She'd screamed until her voice was gone, trying to get someone to listen when she said the trafficking ring in Denver went higher than street level. They'd told her she was burned out, seeing patterns that weren't there. 2 weeks later, her cover was blown. 3 children disappeared in the chaos, and Mara took a bullet to the shoulder that ended her field career. I believe you, she said simply. Dom's eyes filled. He didn't thank her. He didn't have to. I found Valor 3 months ago, Dom continued. They were holding him in a warehouse near the lake, moving him with a shipment heading south. I got him out, but they've been hunting us ever since. He swallowed. We were trying to reach a federal contact, someone outside the system, but the storm... He trailed off. You found a federal contact, Mara said. You just didn't know it. Dom stared at her. Your FBI? On leave. Medical discharge pending. Mara hesitated. I'm not cleared for active duty, but I'm still FBI, and no one steals warriors and sells them like equipment. Not on my watch. Valor chose that moment to move. He crossed to Mara and sat directly in front of her, eyes locked on hers. Then he lifted his right paw and held it out. Mara took it. The dog's pad was rough, scarred, but his grip was gentle. He's choosing you, Dom whispered. He doesn't do that. Valor doesn't trust anyone but me. Maybe he knows I need him as much as you do, Mara said quietly. A knock at the door shattered the moment. All 3 of them froze. The knock came again. 3 sharp raps. Official. Controlled. Mara grabbed the rifle and moved to the window. A woman stood on the porch, hood pulled low, hands visible, no weapon drawn. She was older, 60s maybe, with the kind of posture that said military even in civilian clothes. FBI? The woman called. I'm a medic. Your SOS pinged my scanner. I'm here to help. Mara didn't lower the rifle. Name? Elena Cortez, retired Army, 82nd Airborne. I live 2 cabins down. I've got supplies, and that man on your floor needs more than blankets. Dom was trying to sit up. I know that name, he gasped. Cortez. You wrote the field manual on combat trauma care. I used your protocols in Afghanistan. Elena's voice softened. Then you know I'm here to help, son. Let me in before we all freeze. Mara looked at Valor. The dog's posture had relaxed. His tail was neutral. Not trust, but not alarm either. She opened the door. Elena stepped inside, snow dusting off her shoulders, and her sharp eyes took in everything in 3 seconds. The wounded SEAL, the underweight war dog, the former FBI agent holding a rifle with white knuckles. Well, Elena said calmly, this is going to be an interesting night. She knelt beside Dom, hands already moving, checking pulse, checking pupils. You've got hypothermia, blood loss, and probably a cracked rib. How long have you been running? Long enough, Dom said. Elena's gaze cut to Mara. You're hurt too. I can see it in how you're holding that shoulder. I'm fine. No one here is fine, honey. That's why I'm here. Elena pulled supplies from her bag, IV fluids, thermal blankets, antibiotics. Now someone tell me what fresh hell landed on my mountain. Mara told her. Not everything, not the classified parts, but enough. Elena's face hardened with each word. When Mara finished, the older woman sat back on her heels and looked at Valor. They're stealing war dogs, Elena said flatly. That's what you're telling me. Yes, ma'am, Dom said. Elena was quiet for a long moment. Then, my son was Army, canine handler. He died in Kandahar with his dog. They told me it was an IED. Her voice didn't waver, but her hands did, just slightly. I've always wondered if they told me the truth. The room went very still. I'm sorry, Mara said, because there were no other words. Elena nodded once. Then she stood, and her face was granite. If someone is stealing these animals, selling them like merchandise, defiling their service, she looked at each of them, then we're going to burn that operation to the ground. Together. Outside, the storm howled. The emergency lights on Mara's SUV kept pulsing, red and blue, red and blue. A warning and a promise. And somewhere in the darkness beyond the trees, someone was watching, waiting for the lights to go out. But inside the cabin, 3 broken humans and 1 scarred dog formed something that hadn't existed an hour ago. A unit. A team. A family held together by shared wounds and the bone-deep understanding that sometimes salvation arrived in the snow, knocked once, and asked you to be brave enough to open the door. Valor lay down between Dom and Mara, his body a bridge, his presence a vow. They had no idea what dawn would bring, but for the first time in months, Mara Sullivan felt something she'd almost forgotten. Hope. And hope, she'd learned, was the most dangerous weapon of all. Dawn came without permission, gray light seeping through the cabin windows like dirty water. Mara had been awake for 3 hours, watching the storm finally exhaust itself into scattered flurries. Elena had stayed through the night, monitoring Dom's vitals, adjusting his IV drip, speaking in that calm military cadence that made you believe everything might actually be okay. It wasn't okay. Mara knew that, but the lie was useful. Dom was conscious now, propped against the couch with enough blankets to bury a small car. His color had improved from corpse gray to something almost human. Elena had forced him to drink broth, take antibiotics, and accept the reality that he wasn't running anywhere for at least 48 hours. "I don't have 48 hours, Dom had argued, his voice still rough as gravel. "Then you'll die in 47, Elena had replied without looking up from her medical bag. "Your choice." He'd shut up after that. Mara stood at the window now, coffee mug warming her hands, watching the tree line. Valor sat beside her, ears forward, eyes tracking movements she couldn't see. The dog hadn't eaten yet. He'd sniffed the food Elena offered, then walked away like it was an insult. "He won't eat until he feels safe," Dom said from the couch. "Could be days." "That's not sustainable." "Neither is what we've been doing. But here we are." Dom shifted, wincing. "You didn't have to help us. You could have called it in and walked away." Mara turned to look at him. "Could I?" Dom held her gaze. Something passed between them, an understanding that didn't need words. They were both people who'd been told to walk away, to let the system handle it, to trust that someone else would care enough to finish the job. They both knew that was a lie people told themselves to sleep at night. "The SOS went through," Elena said, checking her phone. "County dispatch says the plow cleared Route 19. Sheriff's heading up now. Should be here within the hour." Mara's stomach tightened. "What did you tell them?" "The truth. Injured Navy personnel, possible hypothermia, requesting medical transport." Elena's eyes were sharp. "I didn't mention the part about stolen war dogs or trafficking networks. That's your story to tell." "Sheriff Nolan Grant," Dom said suddenly. "Is he the one coming?" Elena nodded. "You know him?" "Know of him. Former Marine, 2 tours in Iraq. Came back, went into law enforcement. He's got a reputation for not taking federal bullshit." Dom tried to smile and failed. "That could work for us or against us." "It'll work for us," Mara said, with more confidence than she felt. "If he's worth anything, he'll listen to evidence." The sound of an engine broke through the morning quiet. Heavy, powerful, moving slow. Valor's body tensed, his lips pulled back just enough to show teeth. "Easy," Mara murmured. "Let's see who it is first." She moved to the window. A county sheriff's SUV rolled up the drive, followed by a second vehicle she didn't recognize. Both stopped near her FBI-issued car, emergency lights dark but present, official, careful. The sheriff who stepped out was exactly what Mara expected, and nothing like she'd imagined. Late 40s, built like someone who still worked out like the military hadn't left his bones. Salt and pepper beard, pale eyes that swept the cabin perimeter before landing on the door. He moved like a man who'd cleared rooms where the wrong step meant dying. Behind him, a second man emerged from the unmarked vehicle. Younger, leaner, wearing winter tactical gear that said Federal, even without patches. He had dark, tired eyes and the kind of face that had learned not to show surprise at anything. "That's not local," Dom said quietly. "That's HSI. "Homeland Security Investigations?" Mara's pulse kicked up. "How'd they get here so fast?" "They were already watching," Dom said. "Had to be. Which means either we're about to get help, or we just got boxed in." Elena moved to the door before Mara could. The older woman opened it with the authority of someone who'd faced down worse than 2 law enforcement officers. "Sheriff Grant," Elena said. "You made good time." "Ms. Cortez?" The sheriff's voice was deep, controlled. "Dispatch said you had a medical emergency." "Inside." Elena stepped back. "And bring your friend. We've got a situation that's bigger than frostbite." The sheriff's eyes found Mara first, then traveled to Dom on the couch, then stopped on Valor. His expression didn't change, but something shifted in his posture. Recognition, maybe. Or respect. "Special Agent Mara Sullivan," Mara said, not extending her hand. "FBI, currently on medical leave." Sheriff Nolan Grant. He stepped inside, bringing cold air with him. This is Special Agent Reese Dalton, HSI. We've been coordinating on some cross-jurisdictional concerns in the area. Concerns, Dom repeated. That's a polite word for it. Dalton's attention snapped to Dom. You're Dominic Brennan, Navy SEAL, reported AWOL 4 months ago. I prefer pursuing independent investigation, Dom said. Your command prefers court-martial. Dalton's voice was flat. You disappeared without authorization, ignored multiple recall orders, and allegedly interfered with an ongoing federal operation. Allegedly, Dom repeated. You mean the operation where you've been watching Apex Canine Solutions move stolen military assets across state lines and doing nothing about it? The room went very quiet. Dalton's jaw tightened. Grant's eyes narrowed. Elena crossed her arms and looked like she was watching a chess match where both players had guns. We've been building a case, Dalton said carefully. For how long? Dom's voice rose, pain and fury mixing into something raw. How many dogs have been sold while you built your case? How many handlers were told their partners died when they were really in a shipping container heading to God knows where? Stand down, sailor, Grant said, not unkindly. You're in no condition to fight anyone. Then sit down and listen, Mara cut in. She pulled out Dom's folded paper, the one with coordinates and crossed out names. Because we have evidence you're going to want to see. For the next 20 minutes, they talked. Dom explained what he'd found, the fake death certificates, the financial trails, the warehouse near Blue Haven Lake where he'd discovered Valor in a cage marked for shipment. Mara added what she'd researched about Apex Canine Solutions, the corporate structure, the too-clean history of Marcus Devlin. Grant took notes. Dalton listened with the expressionless face of a man who'd heard confessions from terrorists and wasn't impressed by mere criminals. When Dom finished, Dalton was quiet for a long moment. Then, we know about Apex. We've known for 16 months. Dom's hands clenched into fists. Then why? Because Devlin's smart, Dalton interrupted. He doesn't touch the product, doesn't communicate directly with buyers. Every transaction goes through 3 layers of shell companies and offshore accounts. We've been trying to build a RICO case that'll stick, but we need evidence that ties him directly to the operation. I can give you that, Dom said. I have photos, shipping manifests, guard schedules. I spent 3 months embedded near that warehouse watching their patterns. Where's the evidence now? Grant asked. Dom's face went carefully blank. Safe? That's not an answer. It's the only one you're getting until I know we're on the same side. Dalton stood, frustration crackling off him like static. We are on the same side, Brennan, but you're a fugitive from military justice. Anything you've gathered could be challenged in court because you obtained it outside legal authority. Then we make it legal, Mara said. All eyes turned to her. I'm FBI. Grant's county sheriff with jurisdiction over the lake area. Dalton's federal HSI with authority over trafficking operations. We coordinate a joint investigation, and everything Dom found becomes part of an official case. You're on medical leave, Dalton pointed out. I'm a federal agent with authority to investigate crimes. My duty status doesn't change that. Mara met his eyes. Unless you want to explain to your supervisor why you turned away a witness and evidence because of paperwork. Grant made a sound that might have been a laugh. She's got you there, Dalton. Dalton looked at Dom, then at Valor, then back to Mara. This dog, he was declared KIA 2 years ago? Yes, Dom said. We need veterinary confirmation, chain of custody documentation, proof he's who you say he is. I can handle that, Elena spoke up. Dr. Samuel Cross runs the vet clinic in town, former Army Veterinary Corps.
He'll know how to scan for military chips and document everything properly. Grant nodded.
Then that's our first move. We verify the dog's identity, we establish that Apex falsified death records, and we use that as probable cause to obtain warrants for their financial records. They'll know we're coming, Dom said. The second I walked into that cabin, their tracker started pinging. He gestured to Valor. They know where we are. They're just waiting for the right moment to take him back. Let them try, Grant said, and there was something cold in his voice that reminded Mara why Marines had reputations. This is my county. They operate here. They do it by my rules. And those rules say you don't hunt people on my mountain. Valor chose that moment to stand. He walked directly to Grant and sat, staring up at the sheriff with those amber eyes that seemed to see through skin to whatever lived underneath. Grant looked down at the dog. Slowly, carefully, he extended his hand, palm down, letting Valor sniff. The Malinois leaned forward, nose working, processing scent and intention and threat level. Then Valor's tail moved. Just once. A single wag. He doesn't do that, Dom said quietly. He doesn't trust anyone. He's a good judge of character, Grant replied. He looked at Mara. We move fast. Dr. Cross first, then the warehouse. If there's evidence there, we find it before Devlin's people can sanitize the scene. They've already cleaned it, Dom said. I guarantee it. They're professionals. Professionals make mistakes when they're in a hurry, Dalton said. And you showing up here alive with their stolen merchandise? That put them in a hurry. Elena checked her watch. Cross opens his clinic at 8. It's 7:40 now. I'll call ahead, tell him we're bringing in a special case. Mara felt the momentum building, that familiar sensation of a case taking shape. But underneath it was something else. Fear. Not for herself. For Dom, who looked like he might collapse again any second. For Valor, who'd been through more than any living thing should have to endure. You can't come, she told Dom. You're barely stable. The hell I can't. Dom tried to stand and made it halfway before his legs wobbled. Elena caught him with the efficiency of long practice and pushed him back down. Listen to the woman, Elena said. You go out there now, you're a liability. To yourself, to the operation, to that dog. She softened slightly. I'll stay with you, keep you updated. But you need to rest, or you won't be any good to anyone. Dom looked at Valor. The dog returned his gaze, and something passed between them that Mara couldn't name. Understanding, maybe. Or trust. Or the terrible knowledge that sometimes love meant letting go, even temporarily. Protect him, Dom said to Mara. Whatever happens, he doesn't go back in a cage. Ever. I give you my word, Mara said. They loaded Valor into Grant's SUV because it had a proper kennel cage and because it sent a message. This dog was under official protection now. Valor went reluctantly, looking back at the cabin where Dom stood in the doorway, wrapped in blankets, looking every inch the wounded warrior, watching his unit deploy without him. The drive to Dr. Cross's clinic took 12 minutes through snow-packed streets. The town of Blue Haven looked like a postcard, all pretty storefronts and church steeples, and people who waved at the sheriff's vehicle like he was a neighbor, not law enforcement. Pretty towns, Mara had learned, hid ugly secrets better than anywhere else. Dr. Cross's clinic sat at the edge of town, a low building with warm lights and a hand-painted sign that had survived 40 winters. The veterinarian met them at the door before they could knock, a man in his mid-50s with weathered hands and kind eyes that took in Valor's condition in a single glance. Elena called, Cross said. Come in, quickly. The exam room smelled like antiseptic and dog treats. Cross worked with the calm efficiency of someone who'd treated animals in war zones, his hands gentle even as they moved fast. He scanned Valor once. Nothing. Adjusted the angle. Tried again. Still nothing. Sometimes the chips migrate, Cross murmured. He moved the scanner slowly along Valor's shoulders, down his spine, behind his left shoulder blade where old scar tissue puckered the fur. The scanner beeped. Cross's eyebrows rose. He read the screen, frowned, read it again. "What is it?" Mara asked. "This chip is military issue, old model, partially corrupted." Cross looked up. "And according to the registry, this dog's status is listed as deceased. Died in a training accident 2 years ago." Grant and Dalton exchanged looks. "Can you pull the full record?" Dalton asked. Cross typed quickly. "Valor, Belgian Malinois, 7 years old. Trained in explosives detection and combat patrol. Handler was..." He stopped. Handler was Dominic Brennan. Status changed to KIA on the same date as the dog. Cross looked at them. Someone buried them both on paper. But failed to bury them in reality, Grant said quietly. "That's our proof. Print everything. We need documented evidence that Apex falsified military death records." While Cross printed, Mara knelt beside Valor. The dog was trembling slightly, stress finally breaking through his training. She rested her hand on his head, feeling the warmth of his skull, the rapid flutter of his pulse. "You're doing so good," she whispered. "So good, Valor. Almost done." Valor leaned into her touch, just slightly, and Mara felt that crack in her chest widen. This animal had been through hell. Stolen, caged, sold like equipment. And he was still trying, still trusting, still willing to believe that humans might, occasionally, do the right thing. "We've got something else," Cross said, studying the scanner. "There's a secondary signal. Faint, but it's there. Not a standard chip." Dalton moved closer. "A tracker? That would be my guess. Probably sewn into his harness or collar at some point." Cross ran his hands carefully over Valor's gear. He found it in the harness strap, a lump of newer stitching that didn't match the rest. "Here." Grant pulled a knife and carefully cut the threads. Inside was a small black device, no bigger than a thumbnail. Its tiny LED blinked once. Green. Active. "That's how they've been following him," Mara said. "They've known his location this entire time." "Which means they know he's here," Dalton said grimly. "At a vet clinic, with law enforcement. They'll know we're investigating." "Good," Grant said. "Let them know. Let them panic. Panicked people make mistakes." He sealed the tracker in an evidence bag. "We keep this. Let them wonder why the signal stopped moving." They headed for the warehouse next, a 20-minute drive that took them along the frozen lake. The ice stretched out like hammered silver, and Mara could see the tracks, cross-country vehicle trails, snowmobile paths, the temporary roads that only existed in winter. "That's how they move the shipments," Dalton explained. "Ice roads. No permanent infrastructure, no paper trail. When spring comes, the roads melt and there's no evidence they ever existed." The warehouse sat near the shore, corrugated metal walls and high windows, looking exactly like every other storage building Mara had ever seen. Ordinary. Forgettable. Perfect. Grant had a warrant. Not a full search warrant, they didn't have enough for that yet, but a safety inspection order, the kind that let county officials check structural integrity after heavy storms. It was thin legal coverage, but it was coverage. They entered through the main bay. The interior was cold, dim, and smelled wrong. Oil, yes. Metal, yes. But underneath was something sharper, chemical, recent. "Someone cleaned," Dalton said quietly. "Recently. Look at the floor." The concrete near the entrance was still slightly damp, and the shine was different from the rest. Scrubbed. Hard. Valor's nose dropped immediately, tracking scents invisible to human senses. His body language changed, more alert, more tense. He pulled toward the back of the warehouse, toward a corridor lined with empty crates. "He's got something," Mara said. They followed him to a steel door at the corridor's end. It wasn't marked, wasn't labeled, just existed there like an oversight. Grant tested the handle. Locked. New lock, old door. Someone had upgraded security recently. Grant looked at Dalton. "This is your call. We're at the edge of the warrant." "Safety inspection includes checking all rooms for structural hazards," Dalton said. "Open it." The lock gave way with 2 hard kicks. Behind it was another corridor, narrow and cold. At the end, another door. This one was reinforced. "That's not for storing tires," Mara said. Grant signaled for quiet. They moved together, years of training synchronizing their movements. Grant opened the final door, and they stepped through. The smell hit first. Stale air, fear sweat, the sour note of living things kept in bad conditions. A line of empty kennels ran along one wall, metal bars scratched and dented, water bowls overturned. The concrete was damp where someone had mopped too recently, trying to erase evidence that bodies had been here. "This is it," Dalton breathed. "This is the holding area." Valor moved to one specific kennel and sat, pointed, the way he'd been trained to indicate a find. Mara knelt beside it. Someone had tried to clean it, but cleaning didn't erase everything. She pulled out her phone, turned on the flashlight, and examined the bars. Scratches, bite marks, and on the floor, hidden in a corner where the mop hadn't quite reached, a small metal tag. She picked it up with gloved fingers. Military issue, stamped with a number. "We've got physical evidence," she said. "This place held military animals." Then, from somewhere above them, a sound. Metal on metal. A door closing. Soft, deliberate. Everyone froze. Grant's hand went to his weapon. Dalton moved to the corridor. Valor's ears swiveled, tracking sounds they couldn't hear. "Could be nothing," Mara whispered. "Could be the building settling." "Could be someone who doesn't want us here," Grant replied. They cleared the room quickly, professionally, finding more evidence as they went. Shipping forms in a desk drawer, a burner phone with the battery removed, a ledger with columns of numbers that looked like payments. But no people. Whoever had made that sound was gone. Outside, Grant called for backup. County deputies arrived within 15 minutes, followed by a state crime scene unit. They photographed everything, bagged evidence, documented the kennels and the cleaned floors, and the door that had been locked from the inside. Mara stood in the loading bay, watching the activity, feeling the familiar weight of a case building. But underneath was something else. Unease. The sense that they'd just announced themselves to an enemy who'd been invisible until now. Valor sat beside her, ears forward, eyes on the tree line, watching, waiting. "They'll come for him," Mara said to Grant. "Tonight, tomorrow, soon. They can't afford to let us keep him. He's evidence that walks and breathes." "Then we make sure he's protected," Grant said. "Around the clock. No one gets near him without going through us first." Dalton approached, phone in hand. "I just got word from my office. They're fast-tracking warrants for Apex's financial records. We should have access by tomorrow morning." "That's too slow," Mara said. "Devlin will know we hit the warehouse. He'll start covering his tracks." "He's been covering his tracks for years," Dalton replied. "But he's never had a loose end like Brennan and Valor before." Loose ends make people sloppy. They drove back to the cabin in silence. Mara's mind was racing, connecting pieces, seeing patterns. Military dogs stolen and sold. Death certificates falsified. A network that moved product across state lines using temporary ice roads that disappeared every spring. And somewhere at the center of it, a man named Marcus Devlin, who'd built an empire on the backs of warriors who couldn't speak for themselves. When they reached the cabin, Dom was on his feet, despite Elena's obvious protests. He moved to Valor immediately, dropping to his knees, running his hands over the dog with the desperate, careful touch of someone checking for damage.
"He's okay," Mara said. "We found the tracker, cut it out, and we have proof. Military chip, falsified death records, the works."
Dom's eyes closed. "Thank God." "Don't thank God yet," Dalton said. "We just kicked a hornet's nest. Devlin knows we're investigating. He's going to move fast." "Then we move faster," Dom said. He looked at Grant. "I have evidence. Photos, documents, recordings. Everything I gathered over the last year. It's hidden, but I can take you to it." "Where?" Grant asked. Dom smiled, and it wasn't a happy expression. "The last place they'd ever think to look. The place they think they own."
"The lake," Mara said. "You hid evidence on the ice."
"Under it," Dom corrected. "In a waterproof case, weighted, tied to the underside of the dock at the North Shore. Been there for 3 months. Even if they suspected, they'd never find it in time. Not before the spring thaw makes it accessible." Dalton swore softly. "That's either brilliant or insane." "Both," Dom said. "But it's worked so far." "We retrieve it tonight," Grant decided. "Under cover of darkness, small team. If Devlin has people watching, we don't give them time to react." Elena stepped forward.
"That's a recovery operation in freezing conditions on unstable ice.
You need medical support on standby." "You volunteering?" Grant asked. "Someone has to keep you boys from dying of stupidity," Elena replied. Mara looked at Dom.
"You're not coming."
"The hell I'm not."
"You can barely stand."
"Then I'll crawl." Dom's voice was steel. "That evidence is the only thing keeping us alive. You think I'm trusting it to anyone else?" They stared at each other, and Mara saw in his eyes what she'd felt 6 months ago in Denver. The desperate need to finish what you started. To see it through, even if it killed you. Maybe especially if it killed you, because dying for something mattered more than living for nothing.
"Fine,"
Mara said.
"But you stay in the vehicle until we've secured the area."
"Deal." They prepared like they were going to war, because in a way they were. Grant called in 2 deputies he trusted, men who'd served with him overseas. Elena packed medical supplies. Dalton coordinated with his HSI team for backup support, and Mara cleaned her father's rifle, her hands moving on muscle memory, preparing for a fight she hoped wouldn't come, but knew was inevitable. Valor watched everything with those knowing amber eyes. He'd been through this before, the preparation, the tension, the moment before action, when everyone's breath got short and their movements got careful. As the sun set and darkness claimed the mountain, Mara knelt beside the dog one more time.
"This is it," she told him. "We get that evidence, we bring down the people who hurt you. But I need you to understand something. If this goes wrong, if they come for us, you run. You hear me? You run, and you don't look back."
Valor's head tilted. Then he pressed his nose to her palm, warm and damp and alive. It wasn't agreement. It was something better. It was trust. And as they loaded into vehicles and headed toward the frozen lake where evidence lay hidden under ice and secrets waited in the dark, Mara understood that trust was the most fragile and most powerful weapon they had. The question wasn't whether they'd find what they were looking for. The question was whether they'd survive what found them first. The lake at night looked like something from a nightmare dressed as a dream. Black water beneath white ice. the kind of surface that appeared solid until you learned otherwise. The moon was 3/4 full, throwing enough light to see by, but not enough to feel safe. Mara stood at the North Shore access point, feeling the cold bite through her tactical jacket. Her shoulder ached where the old injury lived, that nerve damage that lit up whenever her body remembered it wasn't invincible. She ignored it. Pain was just information, and right now, she needed to focus on everything else. Grant's team had set up a perimeter using 2 vehicles positioned to block the access road. His deputies, both former Army, moved with the quiet efficiency of men who'd done this work in places where mistakes meant body bags. Dalton coordinated with his HSI backup team via encrypted radio, their voices crackling through the cold air like static electricity. Dom stood beside Mara, despite everyone's better judgment. He'd refused to stay in the vehicle, and Elena had finally given up trying to force him. He looked like death warmed over, his face gray in the moonlight, but his eyes were sharp, alert. This was his operation, his evidence, and no amount of hypothermia was going to keep him from seeing it through. Valor stayed close to both of them, positioned between Mara and Dom like he was trying to keep his pack together through sheer proximity. His breath came out in white puffs, his body tense but controlled. "The dock's about 200 yards out," Dom said, pointing toward a dark structure barely visible against the ice. "I weighted the case and tied it to the support beam on the southeast corner. Should still be there unless someone got incredibly lucky." "Or incredibly suspicious," Dalton muttered. He scanned the tree line with night vision binoculars. "I don't like this. Too exposed. Too many angles we can't cover." "Then we move fast," Grant said. He looked at his deputies. "Carter, you're with me. Morrison, you stay here with Cortez and maintain radio contact. Anything moves that isn't us, you call it in immediately." "Sheriff," Morrison said, his voice carrying the soft drawl of someone who'd grown up in these mountains. "I've got movement. East tree line, maybe 300 yards out." Everyone froze. Grant raised his own binoculars. For 10 seconds, nobody breathed. Then, "Could be deer. Could be nothing. Could be someone watching to see what we're doing."
I vote for option 3,
Mara said quietly. "Doesn't change the plan," Dom said through chattering teeth. "They already know we're investigating. Waiting won't make it safer. It'll just give them time to move assets." He was right, and Mara hated it. The tactical part of her brain screamed that this was wrong, that they were walking into an ambush, that smart people would call for more backup and wait for daylight. But the investigator part understood that evidence had a shelf life. Devlin was already moving. Every hour they waited was another hour for him to disappear. "We go," Grant decided. "Sullivan, you're with me and Brennan. Carter, you take rear guard. Dalton, you coordinate from here. If this goes sideways, I want federal backup rolling before we hit the ice." They moved out in a tight formation. The ice crunched under their boots, each step a small gamble that the surface would hold. Dom walked like every muscle hurt, which it probably did, but he kept moving. Valor stayed between them, his paws spreading wide to distribute weight, instinct and training combining to navigate the treacherous surface. 50 yards out, Mara heard it. A crack. Sharp and sudden, like a gunshot made of ice. Everyone stopped. "Don't move," Dom whispered. "Let it settle." The crack spread, a dark line appearing in the white surface, spiderwebbing out from somewhere to their left. It ran for 10 feet, then stopped. The ice groaned like it was considering whether to hold or surrender. "Keep going," Dom said. "Slow. Spread out. Don't bunch up." They moved again, each step careful, each breath held. The dock emerged from the darkness ahead, a skeletal structure that looked like it had been abandoned for years. Support beams thick with ice, boards weathered gray, the whole thing tilting slightly, as if it had given up on being level. Dom knelt at the southeast corner, his gloved hands fumbling with a length of rope tied to the beam. It's here. Still here. Thank God. He pulled. The rope resisted, frozen to whatever it was attached to below. Dom pulled harder, his breath coming in sharp gasps that said his ribs weren't happy about the effort. Let me, Mara said, taking the rope. She pulled steady and strong, feeling the weight on the other end, feeling it resist, and then give way. Something dark broke the surface of the water beneath the ice. A black case, wrapped in layers of waterproof material. Dom grabbed it with both hands like it was a newborn baby. Got it! Let's move! That's when the lights hit them. Bright, blinding, coming from the far shore where no lights should have been. Mara's vision whited out for a second, her eyes struggling to adjust. She heard engines, multiple vehicles, moving fast across the ice road from the opposite direction. Contact! Carter shouted into his radio. Multiple vehicles approaching from the west shore. At least 3, maybe 4. Grant's voice was ice-cold calm. Fall back to the access point. Now! Move! They ran. Not fast. You couldn't run fast on ice, but as quick as the surface allowed. Behind them, the vehicles were closing distance, their headlights turning the frozen lake into a stage where everything was visible and nothing was safe. Valor ran ahead, his body low, his gait eat up ground despite his limp. Dom clutched the case against his chest, stumbling once, catching himself. Mara grabbed his arm, pulling him forward, her shoulder screaming, but her legs still working. Gunfire cracked across the ice. Not close. Not yet. Warning shots, maybe, or just bad aim in the dark and the cold. The sound echoed off the mountains, multiplying until it seemed like they were surrounded by invisible shooters. They're not trying to hit us, Dalton's voice came through the radio. They're hurting us, trying to force us toward the south access. Why? Grant demanded, still running. Because that's where the ice is thinnest, Dom gasped. I've been studying this lake for months. The south access sits over a natural spring. The ice never gets as thick. They're trying to drop us through. More gunfire, closer this time. A round hit the ice 10 feet to Mara's left, sending up a spray of frozen shards that glittered like glass in the headlights. We can't make the north access, Carter said. They've cut the angle. We'll be exposed for too long. Grant processed this in the time it took his boot to hit the ice twice. Then we don't go north. We go to shore, any shore. Find cover in the trees, and fort up until backup arrives. They changed direction, angling toward the nearest tree line. The vehicles behind them adjusted too, engines roaring, lights sweeping across the ice like predators hunting by sight. Mara's lungs burned. Her shoulder felt like someone was driving nails through the joint, but she kept moving, because stopping meant dying. And she'd survived too much to die on a frozen lake in Montana at the hands of people who stole dogs for profit. They hit the shore at a full stumble, boots finding purchase on frozen mud and snow-covered rocks. The trees closed around them like arms, cutting off the headlights, plunging them into darkness that felt like salvation. Keep moving, Grant ordered. Put distance between us and the shore. Find defensible ground. Behind them, the vehicles stopped at the ice edge. Doors opened, voices shouted, coordinating. At least 6, maybe 8 people. Armed. Trained. Not amateurs who'd panic at the first sign of law enforcement. Mara found a position behind a thick pine tree, her back against the bark, her father's rifle in her hands. Dom collapsed beside her, still gripping the case. Valor positioned himself between them and the threat, his body vibrating with controlled aggression. How many rounds do you have? Grant asked Mara. 12 in the rifle, 2 full magazines for my service weapon. She'd brought it despite being on leave, because some habits died hard and paranoia kept you alive. Make them count, Dalton's voice crackled through the radio, cutting in and out. Backup is en route. State Police Tactical Team and my HSI unit. ETA 15 minutes. We don't have 15 minutes, Carter said from his position 20 yards to the left. They're spreading out. Flanking maneuver. The first shot came from a different direction than Mara expected. High and to the right, from someone who'd moved fast through the trees. The round hit the trunk above her head, sending bark fragments into her hair. Grant returned fire, 3 controlled bursts that said Marine, even if he'd traded desert camo for a sheriff's badge. Someone screamed in the darkness. Not a death scream. A hit, maybe. Enough to make them more cautious. "Brennan!" a voice called from the darkness. Male. Controlled. Educated. Not the voice of hired muscle. "Dominic Brennan! I know you're out there. I know you have something that belongs to me." Dom's jaw clenched. "Devlin," he breathed. "That son of a bitch came himself." "You've been quite the nuisance," Devlin continued, his voice carrying through the cold air with the confidence of someone who thought he'd already won. "Interfering with my operations, stealing my property. Did you really think you could hide forever?" "Your property?" Dom shouted back, rage making his voice raw. "Those are living beings, warriors who served their country. You don't own them." "Oh, but I do," Devlin replied, and there was amusement in his tone. "I own them legally. I own them because the system is designed to let people like me thrive. Those dogs are declared dead. Once you're dead, you stop existing. You stop having rights. You become property that can be redistributed to whoever has the right connections and the right price point." Mara felt sick, not because Devlin was wrong, because he was right. Military working dogs were classified as equipment, not personnel. When they were declared KIA, they became inventory to be disposed of. And in a system that valued paperwork over lives, someone smart enough could make anything disappear. "The FBI's on to you," Mara called out. "HSI's on to you. You don't walk away from this." "Special Agent Sullivan," Devlin said, and the fact that he knew her name sent ice down Mara's spine. "The agent who couldn't save those children in Denver. The agent whose entire undercover operation collapsed because she pushed too hard, trusted the wrong people, got herself shot, and 3 kids disappeared into trafficking networks you'll never dismantle." Mara's hands shook. Her breath came too fast. The world started to tunnel. Then Valor was there, pressing against her leg, breathing slow and steady, anchoring her, reminding her that past failures didn't erase present purpose. "You don't know anything about me," Mara said, her voice steadier than she felt. "I know you're broken," Devlin replied. "I know you're on medical leave because you can't handle the job anymore. I know that whatever evidence Brennan thinks he has won't matter because you're not even supposed to be operating in an official capacity. Any case you build will be challenged and dismantled in court." "He's stalling," Dalton's voice came through the radio. "Backup's 12 minutes out. He's trying to keep you talking while his people move into position." Grant caught Mara's eye and gestured. Movement to the right. 2, maybe 3 people trying to flank under cover of Devlin's monologue. "What do you want, Devlin?" Dom called out. "I want my dog back," Devlin said simply. "Return Valor, walk away, and we all go home." "You keep whatever little evidence you've gathered. I'll take the dog and disappear. Clean break. No one else has to die tonight." "No one has to die anyway," Grant said. "You're surrounded. More law enforcement is coming. Your options are surrender or prison. Choose smart." Devlin laughed. Sheriff Grant, former Marine, 2 tours in Iraq, came home and decided to play small-town hero. Do you really think your county sheriff's department can handle what's coming? I have resources you can't imagine. Lawyers who eat federal prosecutors for breakfast. Connections that go higher than you'll ever reach.
Maybe, Grant replied. But I've got jurisdiction. I've got evidence. And I've got enough firepower to make sure you don't leave this mountain. So here's your choice. Surrender? Or we do this the hard way.
The silence that followed was worse than the talking. Mara counted heartbeats. 5, 10, 15. Then all hell broke loose. Gunfire erupted from 3 directions at once. Muzzle flashes lit up the darkness like deadly fireflies. Rounds hit trees, rocks, snow, everything except the people they were aimed at, because shooting in darkness and cold with adrenaline pumping wasn't like the movies where everyone was a marksman. Mara returned fire, picking her targets by muzzle flash, aiming low because she wanted to stop people, not kill them. 1, 2, 3 shots. Someone screamed, someone fell. The shooting from that position stopped. Carter was firing in controlled bursts from his position, providing cover for Grant, who was moving forward, using the terrain, closing distance on the shooters, trying to flank from the right. Dom had pulled his service pistol from God knew where and was shooting one-handed, the other arm still clutching the case against his chest. His aim was shaky, but his intent was clear. He'd rather die than give up what he'd fought so hard to protect. Valor stayed low, pressed against the ground, but his eyes never stopped moving, tracking threats, calculating angles. Every inch a war dog, even without orders to engage.
"We've got runners," Carter shouted. "2 breaking south, back toward the lake."
"Let them go," Grant ordered. "We hold position until backup arrives. Don't chase into the unknown." But the shooting didn't stop. It intensified. And Mara realized with sick certainty that Devlin hadn't brought his people here to negotiate. He'd brought them here to eliminate the threat permanently. Evidence didn't matter if everyone who could testify ended up dead on a mountainside. A grenade landed 10 feet in front of their position. Mara saw it in the half-second before impact, a small, dark cylinder that tumbled through the snow like the worst game of catch ever played.
"Grenade!" she screamed.
Grant was moving before the word finished leaving her mouth. He dove forward, scooped up the grenade with one hand, and threw it back toward the lake in a motion so smooth it looked choreographed. The explosive detonated in mid-air over the ice, the blast wave hitting them like a physical wall, the sound loud enough to make her ears ring. When Mara's vision cleared, Grant was down. Not unconscious, but down. Holding his left arm against his chest, blood seeping between his fingers.
"I'm okay," Grant gasped. "Shrapnel. Not deep. Keep firing."
Elena's voice came through the radio, tight with professional concern.
"Grant, report your status."
"Flesh wound," Grant said.
"I'll live. Where's that backup?"
8 minutes, Dalton responded. "State police is bringing their tactical team. HSI is coming in with armored vehicles. You just need to hold." 8 minutes might as well have been 8 hours. More gunfire, more muzzle flashes. And then Mara saw him, a figure breaking from cover, running straight toward their position with the kind of reckless courage that usually meant suicide mission. She aimed, squeezed the trigger. Missed. The running figure was too fast, too erratic. He hit Dom like a linebacker, driving him backward into the snow. The case went flying, landing 10 feet away. Dom tried to fight back, but his body had nothing left. The attacker pinned him, one hand reaching for the case, the other pulling a knife. Valor exploded forward. The Malinois moved faster than Mara's eyes could track. 1 second he was beside her. The next he had his jaws clamped on the attacker's arm, the one holding the knife, his teeth sinking through heavy winter coat and into flesh beneath.
The man screamed and dropped the knife. Valor didn't let go. He held on with the grim determination of an animal that understood his job and refused to fail at it. Dom rolled away, gasping. Mara ran forward and kicked the knife into the darkness. Carter appeared from the left, weapon trained on the downed attacker. "Don't move," Carter ordered. "Hands behind your head, now!" The man complied, blood running down his arm where Valor's teeth had found purchase.
The dog released on some invisible command and backed away, returning to Dom's side, watching the attacker with eyes that promised worse if necessary. "Good boy," Dom breathed. "Good boy, Valor." The gunfire was slowing now, sporadic instead of constant. Either Devlin's people were running out of ammunition or running out of courage. In the distance, Mara heard the most beautiful sound in the world. Sirens. Multiple vehicles, coming fast. "Backup's here," Dalton announced unnecessarily. "They're coming in from both access roads. Everyone hold your fire and identify yourselves when challenged." The next 5 minutes were chaos of a different kind. State Police tactical team poured into the woods like a disciplined flood, their lights and weapons and radio chatter turning the dark forest into a command center. Devlin's people surrendered or ran, or in 2 cases, were tackled by officers who'd been doing this work for 20 years and knew every trick. Mara found herself sitting on a fallen log with a shock blanket around her shoulders and a paramedic checking her vitals. Her hands were still shaking. Her ears were still ringing, but she was alive. Dom was 10 feet away, getting his ribs wrapped while refusing to let go of the waterproof case. Grant was being treated for the shrapnel wound, arguing with the paramedics that he didn't need to go to the hospital. Elena had appeared from somewhere, her medical bag open, moving between the injured with the calm efficiency of someone who'd seen worse in combat zones. Valor lay beside Dom, his head on his paws, exhausted but alert. Someone had checked him for injuries and found nothing but fatigue. The dog had fought his fight and won. Dalton approached with his phone in his hand and an expression that was equal parts satisfaction and rage. "We got 4 of Devlin's people in custody. They're talking already, trying to cut deals." One of them confirmed that Devlin's been running this operation for 6 years, moving between 30 and 50 dogs per year. "Where's Devlin?" Mara asked. "Gone. He wasn't with the team that attacked you. He coordinated from a distance and disappeared when things went wrong." Dalton's jaw clenched. "But we have his people. We have their statements. We have the evidence Brennan recovered. And we have a federal warrant being executed right now on every property and business associated with Apex Canine Solutions." "He'll run," Mara said. "Let him run," Dalton replied. "We've got his financial records, his communication logs, his entire network mapped. He can run to the end of the earth, and we'll still find him." He paused. "Because of you. Because Brennan refused to quit. Because that dog survived when he should have died." Mara looked at Valor. The Malinois was watching her with those amber eyes that seemed to understand more than a dog should. He'd saved Dom tonight. He'd saved Mara more than once. He'd been the thread that connected all of them. Broken FBI agent, wounded SAIL, determined sheriff. Everyone who'd looked at this case and decided that justice mattered more than convenience. "Open the case," Mara told Dom. "Let's see what we nearly died for." Dom's hands were shaking as he worked the waterproof seals. Inside were 3 portable hard drives, 2 phones, and a thick folder of printed documents. Everything he'd gathered over a year of watching, waiting, photographing, recording. The skeleton of a trafficking network laid bare in ones and zeros and ink. "This is it," Dom said quietly. "This is how we prove what they did. How we bring them all down." Grant limped over, his arm in a sling but his eyes sharp. "We'll need official chain of custody, federal forensics team to analyze the digital evidence, prosecutors to build the case." He looked at Mara. "You up for testifying?" Mara thought about Denver, about the case that broke her, about the children she couldn't save, and the bullet that should have ended her career. She thought about standing in courtrooms and facing defense attorneys who'd rip apart every decision she'd made, every moment she'd hesitated, every second she'd been human instead of perfect. Then she looked at Valor, at Dom, at everyone who'd fought tonight because fighting was the only honorable option.
"Yeah,"
Mara said.
"I'm up for it."
The mountain was quiet now, except for the sound of law enforcement radios and the murmur of officers processing evidence. Dawn was still hours away, but Mara could feel it coming. That shift in the air that said darkness had limits, even when it felt eternal. They'd won tonight. Not completely, not permanently. Devlin was still out there, probably already planning his next move, already calling lawyers and liquidating assets and preparing to disappear into whatever hole rich criminals crawled into when the light got too bright. But they'd won the part that mattered. They'd protected Valor. They'd secured evidence. They'd proven that the system could still work if you pushed hard enough and refused to accept that some battles were unwinnable. As they loaded into vehicles for the long ride back to civilization, Mara felt Dom's hand on her arm. "Thank you," he said simply. "For everything. For opening your door. For believing me. For fighting when you didn't have to."
"Yes, I did,"
Mara replied.
"I absolutely did have to. Because if we don't fight for the ones who can't fight for themselves, then what's the point of any of this?"
Dom smiled. It was the first real smile she'd seen from him, and it transformed his face from hard-edged warrior to something almost peaceful.
"You're going to be okay," she told him. "Both of you."
And for the first time since that night in Denver, when everything fell apart, Mara believed that maybe she would be too. The hospital waiting room smelled like disinfectant and bad coffee, and Mara had been staring at the same magazine for 40 minutes without reading a single word. Dom was in surgery. Nothing life-threatening, Elena had assured her, just repairing damage that should have been treated months ago. Broken ribs that had healed wrong, soft tissue injuries that had turned chronic. The kind of problems that happened when you spent a year running instead of healing. Valor lay at Mara's feet, his head resting on her boot. The hospital had tried to enforce their no animals policy until Dalton had flashed his federal credentials and explained that this was a military working dog involved in an active investigation. After that, the administrator had made an exception so fast it was almost funny. Grant sat across from her, his left arm in a proper sling now, looking exhausted but satisfied. He'd spent the last 3 hours on the phone with prosecutors, walking them through the evidence, building the framework for what would become the largest military working dog trafficking case in federal history. "They found 12 more dogs," Grant said, hanging up his phone. "HSI raided 3 warehouses in 2 states. Most of the animals are in bad shape, malnourished, injured, traumatized. But they're alive." Mara's throat tightened.
"Handlers?"
"Tracking them down now. Some are still active duty and don't know their dogs survived. Some are veterans who've been grieving for years." Grant's voice roughened. "There's going to be a lot of reunions. A lot of tears."
"Good tears,"
Mara said.
"The best kind."
Elena appeared from the hallway, still wearing her coat, her silver hair slightly disheveled. She'd been coordinating with the surgical team, translating medical jargon into language normal humans could understand. "He's out," Elena announced. "Surgery went well. They repaired 3 ribs, drained fluid from his left lung, and stitched up damage to his shoulder that apparently happened 6 months ago and he never treated." She gave Mara a pointed look.
"Sound familiar?"
Mara touched her own shoulder reflexively.
I went to physical therapy.
For 3 sessions before you quit, Elena said. Don't think I didn't pull your medical records. You're both terrible patients.
When can I see him? Mara asked.
He's in recovery now. Another hour, maybe 2. They want to monitor him because his blood pressure's been all over the place. Elena sat down with a sigh that said she'd been on her feet too long.
But he'll be fine.
Physically, at least.
Mentally,
she trailed off.
Mentally takes longer, Mara finished. She knew that. God, she knew that.
Her phone buzzed. A text from Dalton. Press conference in 2 hours. Federal prosecutor wants you there. Optional, but recommended. Mara showed it to Grant.
You going?
Have to. I'm the local authority on record. Besides, someone needs to make sure they get the facts right. Grant stood, wincing slightly. You should come. You're part of this, whether you want to be or not. Mara looked down at Valor. The dog's eyes were half closed, exhausted, but still alert, still ready to respond if needed. She wondered if he'd ever truly relax, or if that part of him had been trained away permanently.
I'm not sure I'm ready to be part of anything public, Mara admitted. The last time I faced reporters, they asked me why I couldn't save those kids. Asked me if I felt responsible for their disappearance. Asked me if I thought my aggressive tactics had compromised the operation.
And what did you say? Elena asked gently.
I said no comment and walked away.
Then I went home and didn't leave my apartment for 2 weeks. Mara's hands clenched.
I'm not good at the public part. I'm good at the work. The rest of it.
The rest of it is politics, Grant said. And politics is just another kind of combat. You don't have to like it. You just have to survive it. The press conference was held at the Federal Building in Helena, 2 hours away. Mara rode with Grant, letting him drive one-handed while she stared out the window at the mountains. Valor rode in the back, in a proper canine transport crate that Dalton had arranged. The dog had resisted at first, some old trauma about cages, but Dom had coaxed him in with quiet words and the promise that this was different. This was temporary. This was safe. The building was swarming with media when they arrived. Cameras, microphones, reporters shouting questions at anyone who looked official. Mara's chest tightened. Her hands started to shake. The noise, the chaos, the aggressive energy. It all felt too much like that day in Denver when everything collapsed. Breathe, Grant said quietly. You don't have to answer their questions. You're here as a supporting presence. Let Dalton and the prosecutor do the talking. But Mara knew how this worked. Someone would recognize her. Someone would make the connection between the FBI agent on medical leave and the Denver case that had gone so spectacularly wrong. Someone would ask the questions that didn't have good answers. Inside, they were ushered into a conference room where Dalton was reviewing notes with the federal prosecutor, a woman named Caroline Voss, who looked like she'd been carved from granite and dressed in power suits. Voss was in her early 50s, with sharp features, gray hair cut in a precise bob, and eyes that missed nothing. Agent Sullivan, Voss said, extending her hand. I've read your file. Impressive work history. Less impressive current status. Mara bristled. I'm on medical leave, not retirement. Semantics. Voss smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. What matters is that you were present during the recovery operation. You have first-hand knowledge of the evidence, and your testimony will be crucial in establishing the chain of events that led to multiple arrests. She's not on trial, Grant said coldly. She's a witness. Everyone's on trial when defense attorneys get involved, Voss replied. They'll pick apart every detail, every decision, every moment of hesitation. If Agent Sullivan takes the stand, she needs to be prepared for that.
Mara felt the old anger rising, the frustration that came from being treated like a liability instead of an asset. I can handle a cross-examination.
Can you handle having your PTSD diagnosis discussed in open court? Voss asked bluntly. Because that's what they'll do. They'll argue that your mental state compromised your judgment, that you saw patterns that didn't exist because you were desperate to redeem yourself after Denver.
The room went very quiet.
That's enough, Dalton said, his voice low and dangerous. Sullivan did her job. She did it well. If you want to question her fitness, take it up with the FBI's Office of Professional Responsibility. But don't stand here and undermine a federal agent who risked her life to take down a trafficking network. Voss held up her hands.
I'm not the enemy. I'm the person who has to win this case, and to win, I need to know every weakness the defense will exploit. Sullivan's medical leave is a weakness. We address it now, or we get blindsided later.
Mara wanted to walk out, wanted to tell Voss exactly where she could file her concerns, but Grant's hand on her arm stopped her.
She's right, Grant said quietly. I hate that she's right, but she is.
The press conference was a carefully choreographed performance. Voss stood at the podium, flanked by Dalton and a representative from the Department of Defense. They announced the arrests, the evidence recovered, the ongoing investigation into Apex Canine Solutions and its proprietor, Marcus Devlin. This operation represents one of the largest cases of military working dog trafficking in U.S. history, Voss said, her voice carrying authority. Over a 6-year period, approximately 300 military working dogs were falsely declared deceased and sold to private buyers, criminal organizations, and foreign entities. These animals are not property. They are veterans. They served our country with honor, and they deserved better than to be treated as merchandise. A reporter shouted a question. Is it true that a Navy SEAL went AWOL to investigate this on his own? Voss's expression didn't change. Petty Officer First Class Dominic Brennan became aware of irregularities in death certificates and pursued an independent investigation when official channels proved unresponsive. His actions, while unorthodox, led directly to this case being opened.
Will he face charges for going AWOL?
That's a matter for military justice to determine. However, I will say that Petty Officer Brennan's cooperation has been exemplary, and his evidence has been instrumental in building our case. Another reporter. What about the FBI agent involved, Mara Sullivan? Isn't she the agent from the Denver trafficking case that fell apart last year?
Mara's stomach dropped. There it was, the question she'd been dreading.
Voss didn't hesitate. Special Agent Sullivan was present during the evidence recovery operation in her capacity as a federal law enforcement officer. Her actions were professional and appropriate. I won't comment further on her service record. But the damage was done. Cameras turned toward where Mara stood at the back of the room. Microphones stretched toward her. Questions came rapid-fire, overlapping, aggressive. Agent Sullivan, do you feel you redeemed yourself after Denver?
Are you still on medical leave for PTSD?
Did your mental health issues compromise this investigation?
Grant stepped in front of her, physically blocking the cameras.
Agent Sullivan is not taking questions. Direct all inquiries to the federal prosecutor's office. They pushed toward the exit, Grant running interference while Mara kept her head down and her breathing controlled.
Don't panic. Don't run. Don't give them the headline they're looking for. FBI agent flees press conference.
Outside, Mara leaned against the building wall and fought to keep her breakfast down.
Her vision was tunneling. Her hands were numb.
The old familiar symptoms of panic rising like floodwater. Then Valor was there. The dog had somehow gotten out of the vehicle, probably Elena, who was standing nearby with a knowing look, and he pressed against Mara's legs, solid and warm and breathing slowly. In
out. In, out.
Mara's hands found his fur. She focused on the texture, the warmth, the living proof that she was here, now, not back in Denver, not back in the moment when bullets flew and children screamed and everything went wrong.
You okay?
Elena asked softly.
No,
Mara said honestly.
but I will be. That's all any of us can promise.
The next 3 weeks moved like molasses mixed with lightning, slow, sticky, but occasionally punctuated by moments of intense activity. Dom was released from the hospital after 5 days, with strict orders to rest and attend follow-up appointments. He ignored the rest part and showed up at Mara's cabin 2 days later with Valor in tow, looking determined and exhausted in equal measure.
I can't stay with Elena anymore, Dom said by way of greeting. She's amazing, but she mothers like it's a competitive sport. I need space to breathe.
Mara looked at him standing on her porch, duffel bag over one shoulder, Valor at his side, both of them looking like they'd been through a war and refused to admit defeat.
You want to stay here?
Mara said. If that's okay. Dom shifted his weight. I'll sleep on the couch. I'll stay out of your way. I can't be alone right now, and you're the only person who understands what it's like to keep waking up and not knowing if you're still in the fight, or if the fight's already over. Mara understood that better than she wanted to admit. She stepped back and opened the door wider.
Couch is yours, but you follow Elena's medical orders, or I'm calling her, and you can explain why you're being stupid.
Dom smiled. Deal. They fell into a routine that felt less like roommates and more like soldiers bunking together between missions. Dom did physical therapy exercises in the living room while Mara worked through her own shoulder rehabilitation. They cooked meals together, simple things that didn't require much effort. They watched the news coverage of the case, wincing at the speculation and the armchair analysis from people who'd never worked a day in law enforcement. Valor thrived in the quiet. He gained weight, his coat grew shinier, and the limp in his front leg gradually faded until it was barely noticeable. But more than the physical recovery, there was something else, a lightness that hadn't been there before. He played. Not often, not dramatically, but sometimes he'd pick up a stick and carry it around like it was precious. Or he'd chase a bird across the yard with something that almost looked like joy.
I've never seen him like this, Dom said one morning, watching Valor investigate a snowdrift with intense focus. Even before everything happened, he was always so serious. Like he knew the job was life and death and he couldn't afford to mess around.
Maybe he's learning that life can be more than survival, Mara said. Aren't we all? The preliminary hearings began in early February. Mara testified twice, answering questions about the evidence recovery, the shootout on the lake, the condition of the warehouse. Defense attorneys tried to rattle her, asking about Denver, asking about her medical leave, asking if she was emotionally stable enough to accurately recall events.
I remember everything, Mara said calmly. I remember finding a dying Navy SEAL on my porch. I remember discovering that military working dogs were being stolen and sold. I remember recovering evidence that proved your client built a fortune by betraying veterans who couldn't speak for themselves.
The defense attorney smiled like he'd won something. You remember what you want to remember, what serves your narrative of redemption after your spectacular failure in Denver. Grant's hand on her shoulder was the only thing that kept Mara from launching across the courtroom.
I remember the truth,
Mara said, her voice steady.
And the truth is that your client is guilty. The evidence proves it. The testimony proves it. And no amount of attacking my character will change those facts.
Outside the courthouse, Dom was waiting with Valor. He pulled Mara into a hug that was awkward and fierce, and exactly what she needed. You were incredible in there, Dom said.
I wanted to punch him.
I know. Everyone in that courtroom knew. But she didn't. That's what incredible looks like. They walked to a small park nearby, letting Valor stretch his legs. The dog moved with confidence now, his tail up, his ears forward, looking more like the war dog he'd been trained to be, and less like the traumatized animal who'd arrived in a blizzard. "I got my orders," Dom said suddenly. "From my command. They're offering me a choice: return to active duty with my record cleared, or take a medical retirement with full benefits and an honorable discharge." Mara's chest tightened.
What are you going to do?
"I don't know." Dom watched Valor investigate a tree. "Part of me wants to go back, finish my career the right way, prove that I'm still capable."
And the other part?
"The other part is tired," Dom said quietly. "The other part wants to wake up without checking for threats, wants to have a conversation without calculating exit routes, wants to be something other than a weapon waiting to be deployed." Mara understood that more than any words could express. "What would you do?" Dom asked. "If you had the choice?" Mara thought about it, about the FBI career she'd built over 10 years, about the cases she'd closed, the people she'd saved, the difference she'd made. But she also thought about the cost, the hypervigilance, the nightmares, the way her body had learned to treat every unexpected sound as a potential threat.
I'd choose peace,
Mara said finally.
Not because I'm weak, not because I can't do the job anymore, but because peace is harder than war, and maybe that's the real test of courage.
Dom nodded slowly. "Yeah, maybe it is." The breakthrough came on a rainy Tuesday in late February. Dalton called Mara at 6 in the morning, his voice tight with controlled excitement.
"We found Devlin."
Mara was awake instantly.
"Where?"
"Argentina, trying to board a private flight to somewhere without an extradition treaty. Argentine authorities grabbed him at our request. He'll be on U.S. soil within 48 hours.
"Does he know about the plea deals?"
Mara asked.
"Does he know his entire organization has turned on him?"
"Oh, he knows. His lawyers have been calling non-stop trying to negotiate. But Voss isn't budging. She wants him in prison for 25 years minimum, and she's got the evidence to make it happen." When Devlin was arraigned, Mara was there. So was Dom. So was Grant, Elena, and Dr. Cross. They sat in the gallery and watched as Marcus Devlin, once untouchable, stood in an orange jumpsuit and listened to 47 felony charges being read aloud. Devlin's eyes found Mara in the courtroom. For a long moment, they stared at each other. She'd expected hatred, or rage, or defiance. Instead, she saw something worse: resignation. The look of a man who'd played a game he thought was rigged in his favor, and discovered too late that the game had rules he couldn't break. "How do you plead?" the judge asked. Devlin's lawyer whispered urgently in his ear. Devlin shook his head once, sharp and final. "Not guilty," he said. But everyone in that courtroom knew it was a lie. The trial would take months to prepare, but the outcome was never really in doubt. The evidence was overwhelming. The testimony was damning. One by one, the people Devlin had trusted, his employees, his business partners, his middlemen, all took plea deals and agreed to testify against him. In the end, it wasn't the shootout on the lake that destroyed Marcus Devlin. It was paperwork, bank transfers, email records, the mundane paper trail of a man who thought he was too smart to get caught. "Justice," Voss said after the arraignment, "isn't always dramatic. Sometimes it's just boring, meticulous work, following every lead, documenting every transaction, building a case one piece of evidence at a time until the wall is so high the defendant can't see over it." Mara nodded, thinking about all the cases she'd worked over the years. The ones that ended with SWAT teams and dramatic arrests got the headlines. But the ones that ended with accounting spreadsheets and forensic analysis were just as important, maybe more so, because they proved that the system could still work if you had enough patience. That night, back at the cabin, Mara and Dom sat on the porch watching Valor play in the snow. The dog had found a stick and was tossing it in the air, catching it, tossing it again, completely absorbed in the simple joy of being alive. "He's going to be okay," Dom said. "Really okay. Not just surviving, actually living." "So are you," Mara said. "So are you," Dom replied. They sat in comfortable silence while the sun set behind the mountains, painting the snow in shades of pink and gold. Somewhere in the distance, a wolf howled. Valor's ears swiveled toward the sound, but he didn't respond with fear or aggression, just acknowledgement. Another predator, doing what predators do. No threat, because there was distance and space and respect. "I'm taking the retirement," Dom said suddenly. "Elena offered me a job. She's starting a program. Veteran support services, trauma counseling, wilderness therapy. She wants me to help run it. Use my experience to help other veterans transition back to civilian life." "That sounds perfect," Mara said. "What about you? What's next for Special Agent Sullivan?" Mara had been avoiding that question for weeks, but sitting here, watching the day end and a new night begin, she finally had an answer. "I'm not going back to active duty," she said. "Not as a field agent. But the FBI has a victim services division. They work with trafficking survivors, help them navigate the legal system, provide support during trials. I think maybe that's where I belong now. Not chasing the bad guys, helping the people they hurt." "That's good work," Dom said. "Important work." "So is yours." Dom reached over and took her hand. Not romantic, not sexual. Just connection. Two people who'd survived something terrible and come out the other side, changed, but not broken. "We're going to be okay," Dom said. "All three of us." And for the first time since that night, when a knock came in the snow and changed everything, Mara believed him. Spring came to Montana the way it always did, reluctantly, fighting winter for every inch of ground. The snow melted in patches, revealing brown grass that would turn green eventually, but needed time to remember how. The lake ice cracked and groaned, breaking into massive sheets that drifted and collided like glaciers in miniature. Mara stood on the cabin porch with her morning coffee, watching the world transform. 6 months had passed since the night Dom and Valor arrived in the blizzard. 6 months since everything changed. Her phone buzzed, a text from Dalton. "Verdict's in, guilty on all counts, sentencing next month." Mara closed her eyes and let herself feel it. Relief, satisfaction, the bone-deep knowledge that sometimes, rarely, the system actually worked the way it was supposed to. She texted back, "Justice." Dalton's response came immediately. "Because of you." "Because you opened your door." Inside the cabin, Dom was making breakfast. The smell of eggs and toast drifted through the screen door, mixing with the scent of pine and melting snow. Valor lay in his favorite spot near the wood stove, chin resting on his paws, eyes half closed, but always aware, always ready. "Devlin?" Dom asked when Mara came inside. "Guilty, all 47 counts." Dom's hands stilled over the frying pan. He didn't say anything for a long moment. Then, "Good. That's good." But his voice was tight, and Mara understood why. Victory didn't erase what had been lost. It didn't give back the year Dom spent running. It didn't undo the trauma Valor had endured.
It didn't resurrect the other dogs who hadn't survived long enough to be rescued. Justice wasn't the same as healing. It was just the beginning. Elena called, Dom said, changing the subject with the deliberate care of someone who'd learned which wombs to avoid touching. The first group arrives next week. 8 veterans, all dealing with PTSD. She wants us both there for the intake process. The program had taken shape faster than anyone expected. Elena had secured funding through a combination of veteran service grants and private donations. She'd purchased 20 acres of land bordering the national forest, built simple cabins designed for accessibility and privacy, and created a curriculum that combined wilderness therapy with trauma counseling and practical skills training. She'd named it Second Chances Ranch, and the name made Mara's throat tight every time she heard it. "I'll be there," Mara said. "The FBI approved my leave extension. I start the victim services position in July, but until then I'm technically on sabbatical." "Technically," Dom repeated with a small smile, "because running a veteran support program in Montana is definitely sabbatical behavior." "It's called healing," Mara replied. "Turns out helping other people is excellent therapy."
Dom plated the eggs, and they ate in comfortable silence. Outside, a truck pulled up the drive. Grant's county SUV, familiar and welcome. The sheriff had become a regular presence over the past months, checking in on them, sharing case updates, occasionally staying for dinner because Elena had decided he looked too thin and needed feeding. "Morning," Grant said, stepping onto the porch. His arm was out of the sling now, the shrapnel wound healed to a pale scar. He looked rested in a way he hadn't 6 months ago, less like a man carrying the weight of an entire county on his shoulders alone. "Coffee?" Mara offered. "Always." Grant accepted the mug and took a long drink. "I've got news. Good news, for once." "We could use good news," Dom said. "The Department of Defense contacted me yesterday. They want to do a ceremony, formal recognition for valor's service, official retirement documentation, and a medal." Grant looked at Dom. "They want to give you a Navy Cross for valor under fire and for exposing the trafficking network."
Dom's face went carefully blank. "I don't want a medal. I want them to explain how 300 dogs disappeared and nobody noticed until I made them look." "I know, but take it anyway. Take it because it'll make other people pay attention. Take it because the media coverage will pressure the DoD to implement better oversight. Take it because sometimes accepting the medal is how you protect the next generation of warriors." Dom was quiet for a long time. Then he looked at Valor, who was watching the conversation with those intelligent amber eyes that seemed to understand more than a dog should. "What do you think, boy?" Dom asked softly. "You want a medal?" Valor's tail thumped once against the floor. "There's your answer," Elena said, appearing in the doorway. No one had heard her arrive, but that was Elena. She moved like smoke when she wanted to.
"Now someone make me coffee before I start issuing orders nobody wants to follow." The ceremony was scheduled for late May, which gave everyone time to prepare and worry in equal measure. Dom spent hours practicing what he'd say if called upon to speak, then threw away every draft because the words felt too formal, too distant from the truth. Mara helped him revise, cutting out military jargon and bureaucratic language until what remained was simple and honest. "I went looking for my dog because I couldn't accept that he was gone," Dom's final draft read. "What I found was a system that had failed him and hundreds like him. This medal isn't for me. It's for every handler who was told their partner died, and every canine who served with honor and deserved better. We don't get to call them equipment anymore. We don't get to treat them like tools to be discarded. They're warriors. They're family. And we owe them everything." On the morning of the ceremony, Valor got a bath. He tolerated it with the stoic patience of a dog who understood that sometimes you endured unpleasant things for unclear reasons. Dom brushed his coat until it shone, sable black and brown catching the sunlight like polished wood. "You look good, buddy," Dom said, running his hands over Valor's shoulders. "Healthy, happy, like the dog you always should have been." Valor leaned into the touch, his weight solid and warm, his breathing steady. The tremor that used to run through his body at unexpected sounds had faded. The hypervigilance that kept him awake for days had eased into normal alertness. He still worked, tracking Elena through the woods during her morning hikes, positioning himself between Dom and perceived threats, performing the trained behaviors that were coded into his DNA. But now there was softness too. Play. Rest. The ability to simply exist without constantly preparing for the next fight. The ceremony was held at a military base 3 hours away. They arrived to find a crowd larger than anyone expected. Active duty personnel, veterans, military families, and dozens of canine handlers with their dogs. Word had spread through the military community like wildfire. The Navy SEAL who'd exposed the trafficking network was getting recognized, and people wanted to witness it. Mara stood with Elena and Grant in the audience, watching Dom walk across the field with Valor at his side. Both of them moved with military precision, years of training evident in every step. But there was something else too. A connection that went beyond handler and dog, beyond partners, into territory that didn't have good words. Love came close. Family was closer. But even that didn't quite capture it. The commanding officer spoke about duty and honor and sacrifice. A representative from the Department of Defense outlined the policy changes being implemented to prevent future trafficking. New oversight procedures, mandatory microchip verification, whistleblower protections for anyone reporting irregularities. These changes exist because Petty Officer Brennan refused to accept a convenient lie, the representative said. Because he chose justice over career, truth over orders. That's the kind of courage we claim to value in the military. Today, we prove we mean it. They pinned the Navy Cross on Dom's chest, the metal heavy and bright against his dress uniform. Then they presented Valor with his own recognition. A custom harness, embroidered with his service record, and a medal designed specifically for military working dogs who'd shown extraordinary courage. Dom knelt and fitted the harness on Valor with hands that shook slightly. "You earned this," he whispered. "Every single day we were running. Every single night you kept watch. Every time you chose to trust when you had every reason not to. You earned this, Valor." Valor sat at attention, posture perfect, and for just a moment Mara could see the young dog he'd been before the trauma. Confident, capable, certain of his purpose and proud of his work. The crowd stood and applauded. Some people were crying. Mara was crying, tears running down her face without permission, but she didn't wipe them away. Some things deserved tears. Some moments were too important to hide behind composure. After the ceremony, they were swarmed by handlers wanting to meet Valor, to thank Dom, to share their own stories of loss and survival. One older man, probably 70, approached with trembling hands and eyes that had seen too much. "My dog," the man said, his voice breaking. "My partner in Vietnam. They told me he died over there. Told me he was too injured to bring home. For 50 years I believed that." He looked at Valor. "But now I wonder. Now I think maybe..." Dom gripped the man's shoulder. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. You deserved the truth." "We all did," the man said. "But at least you fought for it. At least you made them pay attention." He saluted, sharp and precise despite his age. "Thank you, sailor, for all of us who couldn't fight anymore." They stayed for 3 hours, talking to people who needed to talk, listening to stories that needed to be told. By the time they left, Dom looked exhausted but lighter somehow, as if sharing the burden had made it more bearable. On the drive home, Dom stared out the window at the passing landscape. "I keep thinking about all the dogs we didn't save. The ones who died in those warehouses or got sold to people who treated them like weapons. The ones who never made it home." "You can't save everyone," Mara said quietly. "I learned that the hard way in Denver. You do what you can. You save who you can. And you don't let the ones you couldn't save stop you from trying for the next person." "Does it get easier?" "No. But you get stronger. There's a difference." The following week, Second Chances Ranch officially opened. 8 veterans arrived, ranging in age from 25 to 62, all of them carrying invisible wounds that were just as real as missing limbs or shrapnel scars. Elena gathered them in the main lodge, a building with exposed beams and large windows that brought the forest inside. "This program has one rule," Elena told them. "Honesty. You don't have to be okay. You don't have to pretend you're healed. You just have to be honest about where you are and willing to do the work to get where you want to be." Dom and Mara co-led the first session, sharing their own stories of trauma and recovery. Dom talked about the year spent running, the constant fear, the way his body had learned to treat every shadow as a threat. Mara talked about Denver, about the guilt that came from failing people who needed you, about the bullet that should have ended her career, but instead forced her to rebuild herself into something different. "I used to think strength meant never breaking," Mara said. "Now I know strength means breaking and choosing to heal anyway. It means asking for help when you need it, and accepting that you can't fight every battle alone." One of the veterans, a young Marine named Chris, who'd lost his left leg and most of his hearing in an IED blast, raised his hand. "How do you know when you're actually healing versus just pretending?" Dom answered that one. "You know because the pretending exhausts you. Real healing doesn't feel like winning. It feels like surviving one more day, then another, then realizing you've survived a week without falling apart. It's boring and slow and nothing like the movies. But it's real." Valor attended every session, not as a therapy dog officially, but as a presence. He'd move through the room, stopping beside whoever seemed to need him most, offering silent support in the form of a warm body and steady breathing. The veterans responded to him in ways they didn't respond to human counselors. They'd talk to him, hands buried in his fur, saying things they couldn't say to people who might judge. "I don't know if I want to be alive anymore," one veteran whispered to Valor during a private moment. Mara overheard from the next room, but didn't interrupt. "I don't know how to exist in a world where everything is so loud, and nothing makes sense." Valor leaned his weight against the man's legs, grounding him, and stayed there until the veteran's breathing steadied. Later, the man sought out Elena and asked about suicide prevention resources, asked about medication, asked about therapy options, took the first step toward choosing to survive. "That dog is magic," Elena said to Mara after witnessing similar moments throughout the first month. "He's saving lives just by existing." "He's doing what he was trained to do," Mara replied, "except now he's doing it for people who need him, not because orders say so." By July, the ranch had expanded to accommodate 12 veterans at a time. Success stories emerged, people finding jobs, reconnecting with families, choosing to live instead of just surviving. Not everyone succeeded. One veteran left after 2 days, unable to handle the vulnerability required. Another stayed 3 weeks, then disappeared, his demons too strong to face even with support.
We can't save everyone,
Elena reminded the staff during a particularly difficult debriefing after a veteran had relapsed into alcohol abuse.
but we keep the door open. We keep offering the chance. Because sometimes people need to fail a few times before they're ready to succeed.
Mara started her FBI position in victim services in late July, working remotely from Montana 3 days a week and traveling to the field office for 2. The work was different from her field agent days. Less adrenaline, more patience, supporting trafficking survivors through the legal process and helping them access resources for healing. Her first case was a 17-year-old girl who'd been trafficked for 2 years before being rescued. The girl refused to speak, sitting in the interview room with her arms wrapped around herself, eyes distant.
You don't have to talk,
Mara said, pulling up a chair but keeping distance between them.
You don't have to tell me anything. I just want you to know that we found the people who hurt you. We arrested them. They're going to prison. And you're safe now.
The girl's eyes flickered.
How do you know I'm safe? Because I've been where you are. Different trauma, different circumstances, but the same feeling that the world isn't safe and never will be again.
Mara leaned forward slightly.
I can't promise you'll ever feel completely safe. But I can promise you'll learn to live with it.
You'll learn to recognize the difference between real danger and your brain's alarm system going off. And someday, maybe not soon, but someday, you'll realize you went an entire day without being afraid. The girl cried then, the kind of crying that sounded like it came from somewhere too deep to have a name. Mara sat with her through it, not trying to fix it, just being present in the way Valor had taught her. Sometimes presence was the only medicine that worked. 2 years after the night of the knock, Mara stood in her cabin and looked at the changes that had accumulated like snow. Photos on the walls, her with Dom and Valor, the ranch staff, veterans who'd graduated the program, a new couch that didn't have broken springs, kitchen cabinets that actually closed properly. Small things that added up to a life being rebuilt. Dom appeared in the doorway, carrying 2 boxes of pizza because cooking was still more effort than either of them wanted to expend after long days. Valor trotted behind him, tail high, moving with the confidence of a dog who knew exactly where he belonged. Elena wants us to come to dinner tomorrow, Dom said, setting the pizza on the counter. She's making pot roast, which means she's planning something. She only makes pot roast when she's going to ask for favors.
What kind of favors?
Mara asked, already knowing she'd say yes to whatever Elena wanted, because that's what family did. Probably expanding the ranch again. We've got a waiting list of 40 veterans wanting to join the program. She's thinking about buying the adjacent property, building more cabins. Dom grabbed plates from the cabinet. She wants us to help run it full-time. Make it official instead of this part-time consulting thing we're doing now. Mara considered that. It would mean leaving the FBI permanently, not just taking remote assignments. It would mean committing to Montana, to this community, to a life that looked nothing like the one she'd imagined when she joined the Bureau 15 years ago.
What do you think?
She asked Dom. I think we're already doing the work, he replied. Might as well get paid properly for it. He paused, his expression turning serious. But I also think you need to decide what you want, not what you think you should want. You've spent your whole career helping other people. Maybe it's time to do something for yourself.
This is for myself,
Mara said, and realized it was true.
I'm not sacrificing anything. I'm choosing. I'm choosing to work that matters, in a place that feels like home, with people I care about. That's not settling. That's winning.
Dom smiled, the kind of smile that crinkled his eyes and made him look younger than his scars suggested. Then I guess we're expanding the ranch. They ate pizza on the porch, watching the sun set behind the mountains. Valor lay between them, his head resting on Mara's foot, his body warm and solid. In the distance, wolves howled their evening song. Valor's ears swiveled toward the sound, but he didn't react beyond acknowledgement. "I've been thinking," Dom said carefully, "about what happens next. After the ranch, after the work, after we're too old to do the heavy lifting anymore."
"You planning that far ahead?"
Mara teased. "I'm planning for the first time in my life," Dom corrected. "I spent a year running from death. I'd like to spend the next few decades running toward something instead." He looked at her, his expression open and vulnerable in a way that must have cost him. "I'd like to run toward you, if that's something you want." Mara's breath caught. They'd been living together for 2 years, working together, healing together, building something that didn't have a name because they'd both been too scared to define it. But sitting here with the sunset painting everything gold, she realized she wasn't scared anymore.
"Yeah,"
she said simply.
"I want that."
Dom took her hand and they sat in silence while the sky changed colors and the first stars appeared. No dramatic declarations, no grand gestures, just two broken people choosing to be whole together. That night, Valor slept on the rug between their beds like he always did, guarding his pack even in sleep. His breathing was steady and deep, the sound of a warrior finally at rest. The wedding happened in October, when the aspen trees turned gold and the mountains looked like they'd been dipped in fire. They kept it small. Elena, Grant, Dalton, Dr. Cross, a handful of veterans from the ranch, and Valor, wearing a bow tie that he tolerated with resigned dignity. Elena officiated because she had a mail-order minister's license she'd gotten as a joke 20 years ago and never thought she'd use.
"We're gathered here," Elena said,
"to witness two stubborn people finally admit they need each other."
"About damn time."
The guests laughed. Mara and Dom exchanged vows they had written together, promising not perfection, but presence. Not to fix each other, but to show up, even when showing up was hard. Not to erase the past, but to build a future that made the past survivable. When Dom slipped the ring on Mara's finger, his hands were steady. When Mara said, "I do," her voice was clear. And when they kissed, Valor barked once, sharp and certain, as if he'd been waiting for this moment and wanted everyone to know his approval. The reception was held at the ranch, in the main lodge with the fire roaring and food spread across tables that groaned under the weight. Veterans gave speeches that were funny and touching and slightly inappropriate. Grant told embarrassing stories about the night on the lake. Dalton presented them with a framed photo of Valor receiving his service medal.
"To the family we choose,"
Elena toasted, raising her glass. "And to the miracles that arrive in snowstorms when we're too stubborn to know we need saving." Everyone drank to that. As the party wound down and guests departed, Mara stood on the porch with Valor at her side, watching the stars emerge in a sky so clear it looked endless. Dom came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist, his warmth seeping through her jacket. "You okay?" he asked.
"I'm better than okay," Mara said. "I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be."
And she was. After years of running from trauma, from failure, from the fear that she'd never be whole again, Mara had found something she'd stopped believing existed. Peace. Not the absence of pain, but the presence of purpose. Not the erasure of scars, but the transformation of wounds into wisdom. She'd learned that healing wasn't linear, that some days were harder than others, that triggers still existed and probably always would. But she'd also learned that survival wasn't the same as living, and that choosing to live, really live, with vulnerability and hope and the terrifying possibility of joy, was the bravest thing anyone could do. Valor leaned against her leg, his presence steady and sure. And Mara realized something that made her throat tight with gratitude. The knock that came on that snowy night hadn't just brought a dying seal and his war dog. It had brought purpose. It had brought family. It had brought proof that sometimes the worst moments of your life were just doorways to the best ones, if you were brave enough to step through.
Thank you,
she whispered to Valor, running her fingers through his soft fur.
for finding us, for teaching us, for showing us that broken things can be holy.
Valor's tail thumped against the porch boards, and in that simple movement was everything that mattered. Loyalty, love, and the unshakable certainty that they'd all found exactly what they'd been searching for. God didn't waste pain. He redeemed it. He took the stolen dogs and broken agents and wounded warriors, and he wove them together into something stronger than any of them could have been alone. Not despite the trauma, because of it, through it, transforming scars into testimonies and losses into purpose. And if that wasn't a miracle, then miracles didn't exist. But they did. Mara knew they did, because she was living in one, right here, right now, with her husband and her dog and her chosen family, under Montana stars that witnessed everything and judged nothing. Sometimes salvation arrived with a knock in the snow. Sometimes it came with amber eyes and a gentle shoulder pressed against your leg when the world got too loud. Sometimes it looked like choosing to open the door even when every instinct screamed to hide. And